Empires do not die in one great defeat, they rot in silence until a single push exposes the decay. In June of 1940, Europe trembles beneath the thunder of Nazi conquest. Poland has fallen. Norway lies crushed. France, proud, powerful, imperial France, is days from surrender. For the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, the moment is intoxicating. He sees glory, empire, and vengeance. He imagines Roman eagles flying once more over the Mediterranean, just as their German counterparts march triumphantly down the Champs-Élysées. But history has its cruel ironies, because while the world watches Adolf Hitler reshape Europe with blood and steel, Mussolini enters the war not as a kingmaker, but as a gambler. And within months, his regime will be humiliated on 2 continents, his soldiers defeated by outnumbered Greeks and poorly supplied British colonial troops. What went wrong? Why did Mussolini declare war at the very moment his army was least prepared? And was it really Italian failure, or was it a trap sprung by German ambition? This is the story of Italy's disastrous year of 1940 of colonial dreams, crushed by reality of a fascist regime out of step with the war it joined, and of a fateful decision that would doom the Italian Empire before it ever had a chance to rise. At the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Italy stood apart. Although Hitler's Germany had signed the so-called Pact of Steel with Mussolini's Italy, Rome was reluctant to leap into war. Mussolini, ever the master of theatrical speeches and military parades, knew the truth. His army was not ready. Italy had outdated tanks, a weak navy, and an air force that was more show than substance. Only a fraction of its military divisions were at wartime strength. Its economy was fragile, and its factories few. But when France collapsed under German blitzkrieg in May and June 1940, Mussolini smelled opportunity. On June 10, without much preparation or coordination, he declared war on the Allies. He hoped to join Germany's victory, not fight for it. By entering the war after France was effectively defeated, Mussolini imagined himself seizing spoils without paying the price. French North Africa, Corsica, the mighty French fleet, even a share in governing post-war Europe. But he miscalculated badly. Germany had little interest in dividing the French Empire. Hitler wanted a Vichy France that was neutral, cooperative, and intact. And Italy's late entry into the war was not impressive to Berlin. It was seen as opportunistic and shallow. Italy's own military contribution, too, was unimpressive. Italian troops invaded France through the Alpine passes, but were ill-equipped and poorly supplied. They made little headway against battered French defenses. When France surrendered on the 22nd of June, Italy's rewards were meager. Instead of spoils, Mussolini gained embarrassment, and worse, he gained enemies. Italy's declaration of war sent a shock through London. The British feared invasion. The Mediterranean, vital to Britain's empire and trade, was now contested. Malta, Gibraltar, the Suez Canal, all were under threat. Initially, the Royal Navy even considered recalling ships from the Mediterranean, but Winston Churchill, now Prime Minister, reversed the decision. He understood that surrendering the Mediterranean would be surrendering the empire, so Britain prepared for a long war, and a long war needed control of the sea. On June ons, Italy bombed British-held Malta, but Britain struck back. Armored cars and tanks crossed the Egyptian border into Italian Libya, harassing Italian garrisons. Italian forces trained more for colonial repression than mechanized war, responded clumsily. One unit even formed into a Napoleonic-style square formation, which British tanks destroyed with ease. In 3 months, Italy suffered 3 visitata casualties, British losses, just 150, yet Mussolini remained blind to the reality. When France surrendered, he saw it as a green light to expand. He ordered an invasion of Egypt, hoping to seize Alexandria and the Suez Canal, but his commanders hesitated. Marshal Italo Balbo, governor of Libya and commander-in-chief, was skeptical. After Balbo was accidentally killed by friendly fire in late June, his replacement, Rodolfo Graziani, took over. Graziani was experienced in colonial campaigns, but totally unprepared for modern desert warfare. And yet, under pressure from Rome, Graziani invaded anyway. On the 13th of September, Italian forces crossed into British Egypt. Their goal, Sidi Barrani, just 80 kilometers from the border. Despite outnumbering British forces, Graziani's men were undersupplied, undertrained, and demoralized. After reaching Sidi Barrani, they built fortified camps and stopped waiting. One wonders when the English will begin to understand that they have just dealt with the best-fitted colonial army in the world, Rodolfo Graziani. But the British understood more than Graziani realized. Churchill and his commanders were planning something of their own. Even as Graziani's army stalled in the sands of Egypt, Mussolini's eyes turned north to the Balkans. The Mediterranean empire he dreamed of needed not only African colonies, but control over Greece, the Adriatic, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Albania had already been taken in 1939. Now Greece looked vulnerable. Foreign Minister Galeazzo Ciano, Mussolini's son-in-law, pushed for war. He insisted the Greeks were corrupt, disorganized, and would fold quickly. Italian propaganda claimed the Albanian minority in northern Greece would rise as liberators, but others were less convinced. King Vittorio Emanuele, Chief of Staff Pietro Badoglio, and Italy's own ambassador to Greece, Emanuele Grazzi, all expressed doubts. Even Hitler opposed the plan. Germany needed Balkan neutrality, not chaos. The region was a key source of raw materials. British aircraft based in Greece could threaten Romanian oil fields, which were vital to the German war machine. But Mussolini grew increasingly resentful of Hitler's unilateral moves, especially Germany's quiet takeover of Romania. He reportedly fumed, "Hitler always faces me with a fait accompli. This time I am going to pay him back in his own coin." And so, Mussolini prepared a surprise of his own. The invasion of Greece was hastily organized. Troops were withdrawn from harvest duty. Equipment was limited. Ports were clogged, some with barges full of marble for fascist building projects. Troops lacked heavy weapons. Bulgarian cooperation once hoped for was refused. Still, by late October, 6 Italian divisions, including the elite Giulia Alpini, had gathered near the Greek border. On the 28th of October, 1940, Mussolini made his move. At 3 a.m., Ambassador Grazzi handed Greek dictator Ioannis Metaxas an ultimatum: allow Italian forces to occupy key positions or face war. Metaxas replied simply, "Alors, c'est la guerre." Well then, it's war. In Greek memory, this reply became a defiant ochi. No. But in truth, Italian troops had already crossed the border before the ultimatum was even delivered. The assault began with 3 axes. The Ferrara, Siena, and Centauro divisions pushed toward Ioannina. The Giulia division attacked through the central Pindus Mountains, and a smaller force moved along the coast. Although the Greeks had anticipated tension, the shock of real war was staggering. We heard thunder from the west. A rumor spread that war was declared between Greece and Italy. Our hearts froze. Greek soldier diary Gaglius. Rain slowed the Italian advance. In the south, General Charalambos Catsimitros decided to hold at Kalpaki, where artillery from hidden positions hammered Italian tanks. Lacking anti-tank guns, Greek infantry used blankets to jam tank treads. At Grambala Hill, the battlefield seesawed back and forth under artillery and rain. One Greek soldier described the horror. An airplane bomb whistled over me and fell into the forest. A body drowned in blood without skull or brains. A corporal. His intestines poured out. He died in my arms. Konopoulos. To the north, the Julia Division pushed into the rugged Pindus Range. Initially, they advanced, but Greek snipers, terrain, and exhaustion soon halted them. Reinforcements arrived. By the 8th of November, the Italians were retreating, cut off, surrounded, and outnumbered. In just 2 weeks, the Julia Division lost 1/5 of its strength. And now, stunningly, the Greeks went on the offensive. As snow fell on the mountain passes of Albania, Mussolini's imperial dreams unraveled. By late November 1940, Greek forces invaded Albania, recapturing towns and humiliating an Axis power that had hoped to dominate the region. Mussolini ordered airstrikes on Greek cities, but the bombing only deepened Greek resolve and left frontline troops without badly needed air support. In Rome, panic spread. Whispers of a truce circulated. Ministers urged caution. Some even suggested asking for German help. Hitler, upon learning of the invasion during his visit to Florence, erupted in anger. Führer in our rage. This occurrence spoiled many plans. German adjutant's diary. Meanwhile, on the 11th of November, the Royal Navy struck a crushing blow. British carrier-based planes raided the Italian fleet at Taranto, disabling 3 battleships in a daring torpedo assault, a move that would later inspire Japan's own attack on Pearl Harbor. With the fleet crippled and the Greek front collapsing, Italy's imperial dream had become a nightmare. Its overstretched forces now locked in Greece, Albania, Libya, and East Africa were unable to regroup, reinforce, or resupply. But Britain wasn't finished. We have arrived at the second B in Buk-Buk. As far as I can see, there are 20 acres of officers and 100 acres of men. British soldier radioing HQ. In December 1940, Operation Compass, Britain's first major offensive in North Africa, began. It was meant to be a limited raid. It became a rout. On the 9th of December, British troops and Indian divisions struck Nabewa, taking the Italians completely by surprise. The elite Matilda tanks, nearly invulnerable to Italian fire, smashed their way through the camps. Italian defenders had no anti-tank weapons and resorted to throwing grenades. A single doctor later recalled, "It was the nearest thing to hell I ever saw." Latimer. By the end of day 3, Saint-Shabat, nil Italian soldiers had surrendered. More fell in the following days as the British advanced west along the coast. But despite these staggering losses, the Italian military wasn't fully broken. Not yet. Mussolini reshuffled his command, replacing Badoglio with Ugo Cavaliero, and expanded mobilization. A soldier recalled bitterly, "Now they're calling up more age groups. What we hear is bad. All we can do is trust in God." Sir Panless. As 1940 came to a close, Italy had suffered humiliating defeat after defeat. Its military was exposed, its ambitions mocked, but the question remained, why had it gone so wrong? In the wake of Italy's battlefield collapses, a painful introspection began among both Italian officials and future historians. The popular narrative was simple. Italy lost because its army was weak, its soldiers lacked morale, and its dictator was foolishly impulsive. But that version, while convenient, ignores deeper truths. It's true that only 19 of Italy's 73 divisions were properly equipped or ready for war in 1940. And Italy's industrial strength was dwarfed by the other major powers, just two. 7% of global manufacturing output compared to Germany's 10, 7%, and Britain's 9, 2%. Italian troops were often sent to the front with World War I era rifles, outdated artillery, and poor logistics. Radios, armored vehicles, and automatic weapons were scarce, and when they were available, they were sometimes sent first to colonial police forces rather than to frontline troops. But numbers only tell part of the story. Beneath the equipment shortages lay systemic dysfunction. Italian officers, trained in colonial warfare, often misunderstood the demands of modern mechanized conflict. Their tactics emphasized static defense and infantry-led advances, not speed, coordination, or firepower. Even where they matched the enemy in numbers, they failed in planning and flexibility. One critical example, the invasion of Greece. Italian troops were roughly equal to the Greeks in weaponry, but they were thrown into rugged mountain terrain in late autumn, with insufficient supply lines and no serious preparation. The ports of Albania, essential for moving troops and supplies, were never properly upgraded. The Italian Navy, which would have played a key role in resupply, was not even informed of the invasion plan until less than 2 weeks before it began. Worse still, Mussolini's decision-making was clouded by ideology and pride. He dismissed accurate intelligence warning of strong Greek defenses. He believed Bulgaria might join the fight. They did not. He expected a pro-Italian uprising in northern Greece. It never came. The parallel war Mussolini envisioned one where Italy would fight alongside Germany, but on its own terms and for its own glory, was built on delusion. A conscript, writing home in the summer of 1940, perhaps captured the mood best. All the officers have become like beasts. But once we're on the move, they'll pay for it. We'll do like they did in the last war. Bellomo. His bitter tone reflected the fracture between soldiers and officers, and between propaganda and reality. Yet even here, the narrative is more complicated. A revisionist view has emerged in recent decades, one that challenges the idea that Italy alone was to blame. Historian James Sadkovich argues that Italy's failures were not just due to its own incompetence, but also to the actions, arrogance, and ambitions of Nazi Germany. According to Sadkovich, Mussolini did not want war in 1939. He even considered breaking the Axis alliance after Hitler invaded Poland. Italy's involvement in the Pact of Steel may have been an attempt to restrain Hitler, not support him. When Germany launched its lightning conquest of France, Mussolini saw it not just as an opportunity, but as a threat. Italy had encouraged Austrian independence in 1938, a direct challenge to German goals. Mussolini feared that if he remained neutral while Germany remade Europe, Berlin would punish Italy after victory by seizing its interest in the Balkans and Mediterranean. Thus, Italy's declaration of war may have been less about empire and more about survival. But by entering late, Italy was shut out of German decision-making. There was little cooperation and no real coordination. The Axis alliance, despite its grand rhetoric, was built on distrust and secrecy. Each side kept its plans hidden. And while Germany crushed France with a stunning military machine, it did not share resources, tactics, or strategy with its junior partner. Italy was left to stumble into war half prepared, isolated, and ignorant of Germany's next moves. For example, Mussolini assumed that Germany would soon launch an invasion of Britain. That assumption shaped Italy's entire Mediterranean strategy, a bet that Britain would fall quickly, allowing Rome to seize colonial prizes before peace. But Germany never seriously prepared for an invasion. Instead, Hitler began turning east toward the Soviet Union. Mussolini never saw it coming. And in that misalignment, Italy became overextended. While Germany could concentrate its power, Italy was fighting in North Africa, Greece, East Africa, and planning for future Balkan conquests all at once. British forces, meanwhile, focused their attention where it mattered most to them, the Mediterranean. They knew it was vital to their empire, and they responded with determination. Italy, on the other hand, was left to fight what was, for Germany, a secondary theater and do it alone. Even during Operation Compass, British accounts describe stiff Italian resistance in places. The dramatic mass surrenders, Satkovich Argues, were often due less to morale than to logistics. Italian troops couldn't retreat through the desert on foot. Their vehicles broke down. They were overwhelmed, not because they refused to fight, but because they were trapped. It is thus normal to dismiss, as loss of nerve, Graziani's request for permission to retreat in late 1940. At the same time, Anglo-American writers tend to depict Rommel's various retreats as evidence of military genius. Satkovich, this double standard, heroic German setbacks versus cowardly Italian ones, distorts the historical record. The truth may be less about national character and more about preparation, supply, and alignment. Italy went to war with no clear plan, no coordination with its ally, and no honest accounting of its limits. By the end of 1940, the dream of a second Roman Empire was already dying, and in its place, a new reality emerged. Italy would now fight a German war, on German terms. Help was unwillingly given, and unwillingly accepted. German officer. 1941. On the 14th of December, Hitler signed Directive No. 20 ordering German intervention in Greece. Within weeks, a new name arrived in Libya, a name that would define the North African War, a name that would overshadow Italy's own generals, Erwin Rommel. When German General Erwin Rommel stepped off the transport in Tripoli in early 1941, the war in the Mediterranean was no longer Italy's war. It was Germany's now. Rommel, commanding the newly created Afrika Korps, was sent to stabilize the collapsing Italian position in North Africa. Mussolini's army had been routed. The British had taken tens of thousands of prisoners, seized hundreds of tanks and guns, and were now racing toward Tripolitania. Rommel brought a different energy. He was daring, relentless, and believed in maneuver warfare, a sharp contrast to the plotting, defensive-minded Italian high command. Within weeks, Rommel reversed the tide. He launched a bold counteroffensive that pushed the British back to the Egyptian frontier. But it came at a cost. The arrival of German troops confirmed that Italy had lost its autonomy. No longer was Mussolini's regime shaping the war in the Mediterranean. Now, it was following Berlin's lead. This loss of control wasn't just military. It was strategic, ideological, and symbolic. The fascist vision of a revived Roman Empire, stretching across the Mediterranean, had collapsed under its own weight. Italy had overreached, declaring war in multiple theaters without preparation, logistics, or coordination. And now, Italian ambitions would be subordinated to German strategy. legacies of 1940, empire undone. Italy's disastrous year of 1940 had consequences far beyond battlefield losses. Domestically, it exposed the fragile core of Mussolini's regime. The image of the Deuce as a dynamic, all-powerful leader took a beating. Propaganda could no longer hide the reality of defeat. Recruitment slowed. Morale dropped. Public confidence cracked. Internationally, the failures undermined Italy's position in the Axis alliance. Germany had entered World War II with a clear plan: blitzkrieg, divide, conquer, and isolate. Italy, by contrast, had entered the war with vague ambitions and quickly found itself isolated, vulnerable, and dependent on German rescue. As the war dragged on into 1941, Italy would become more and more a junior partner, used by Berlin for manpower, geographic advantage, and political legitimacy, but rarely consulted as an equal. The tragedy is this: had Mussolini waited, had he kept Italy out of the war, or at least delayed involvement until a more favorable moment, the history of Southern Europe and perhaps of World War II itself might have been very different. Instead, the rush for glory became a march to ruin. Mussolini imagined a war of movement, conquest, and imperial renewal. He got a war of attrition, retreat, and shame. The events of 1940, the failed invasions of France, Greece, and Egypt were not just military blunders. They were a revelation that the fascist myth of strength, discipline, destiny was hollow when tested by modern war. Italy had entered the Second World War with dreams of empire. By the end of its first year, it was already fighting for survival. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the corridors of power in Rome, a silent question echoed, one that Mussolini himself may never have admitted aloud. Was it ever truly Italy's war to win? Or was it always Germany's war to lose? In the deserts of Libya, the snow-covered ridges of Epirus, and the bombed-out harbors of Taranto, the wreckage of Mussolini's ambitions lay exposed. Italy had entered the war not with a plan, but with a performance, not with tanks but with posturing, not with unity but with unspoken doubt. What Mussolini sought was not merely territory, but validation. He wanted to prove to Hitler, to the Italian people, to the world that fascist Italy was still a great power. But what if the greatest danger to a nation is not its enemy, but its insecurity? Italy, in 1940, had neither the resources nor the cohesion to wage a modern war, yet its leader could not accept irrelevance, and so he wagered the country's future for prestige, and lost. In every empire's final moment, there is one last decision that seals its fate. Mussolini's came not with a battle, but with a signature. By declaring war on the 10th of June, 1940, Mussolini pulled Italy into a conflict it could not win. Alongside an ally it did not trust, for prizes it would never hold. And even now, more than 80 years later, that decision still casts a shadow not only over Italy's wartime memory, but over every government that chooses glory over truth, a spectacle over substance, and dreams of empire over the harsh math of reality. Because history doesn't just record the victors, it remembers the deluded. If you found this story compelling and you want to help us uncover more forgotten turns of history, subscribe to the Legacy Files. We ask the questions others overlook, and we follow where the answers lead, no matter how uncomfortable, tragic, or haunting. Until next time,